Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the first session of this year's Grantmakers in the Arts webinar series, Grant-Making Designs for Supporting Individual Artists. I'm Sujin Chan, GIA's Program Manager. We know that individual artists are the DNA from which our art sector is built, but we also know that support for individual artists comes with a different set of opportunities and challenges than support for arts groups and organizations. This series will examine how we support individual artists, the philosophical assumptions, distributing grants or awards, and using data and feedback to inform us on how we can serve artists better. So just a note, one significant model for supporting individual artists, which is invitation-only fellowships or nomination-only awards, we won't be covering that in this particular series, as those approaches may have some operating principles that are different enough that we'll try to explore that in a future webinar sometime. So we began working on this series last fall with the help of GIA's Support for Individual Artists Committee, and in particular with 4 of its members who also served on the ad hoc planning team. I just want to recognize them for all the work that they did to help create this series with us. Travis Laughlin with the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Gabriela Munez from the Arizona Arts Commission, Heather Pontonio with Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, and Roseanne Rice with Regional Arts Commission St. Louis. I want to thank the committee and these individuals for helping make this series what it is. So today we're really excited to have joining us 2 funders, one private and one public, who will help set the stage for our 3-part discussion on supporting individual artists. In this first session, we'll discuss how funding individual artists fits into the broader arts funding landscape, why it's critical that we fund individuals, and some of the common myths about this type of support. Kristina Newman-Scott is the Director of Culture for the state of Connecticut, where she oversees all aspects of the state's programs and services related to art, culture, and historic preservation. In this role, she has been leading efforts for adding a stronger equity lens to its programs and services. Jayson is a Senior Program Officer for the Rasmuson Foundation, a private family foundation based in Anchorage, Alaska. He oversees the foundation's portfolio in arts and culture in addition to working on special projects or special topics in health and education. He's played a strong role in making changes to its programs that better respond to artist needs. So we're really excited to have Jayson and Kristina with us today. So first, a housekeeping note. Throughout the presentation, you can type questions to Kristina, Jayson, or both in the rectangular text box at the bottom of your screen. Since this session is about myths, please feel free to ask about any that you might have about supporting individual artists, and we'll do our best to get to all your questions and myths during the Q&A session, which will follow the presentation. So Jayson will be getting us started today. Welcome, Jayson.
Thank you, Suchan. Hello to everybody, and either good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you may be. Just to extend appreciation to Suchan and to Steve and the crew at GIA for making these webinars possible, and we're excited about the chance to really, through this whole series, to explore a range of issues around the importance of supporting individual artists, and to really get a whole context about what the field is currently doing and key issues around that. So we just really appreciate the chance to share some insights with all of you. So I'll begin by sharing a few slides and a brief background about Rasmuson Foundation, and share information about the programs that we fund and our focus on individual artists. First, to just say that I've been with Rasmuson Foundation for a little over 7 years, and as Suchan mentioned, I've spent the majority of my time managing our arts portfolio, but as a regional funder where we're focused on all things related to Alaska, the foundation provides funding in a range of areas, but my particular focus has been around arts and culture. Rasmuson Foundation is a private family foundation that was established in 1955. And over the last 15 years, we've made very specific strategic investments in the arts and in other areas. Therefore, our arts portfolio has really developed in that period of time. This slide just gives you a very quick snapshot of the Foundation's investments since 2009 and the areas in where we fund. You can see that arts, culture, and humanities consists of about a third of our overall funding strategies. And this includes funding that we direct towards capital infrastructure that's related to the arts, culture, and humanities sector, in addition to programs that are specific to supporting artists and arts organizations and communities. Approximately $2.5 million is committed annually to our arts programs that's non-capital in nature. This just gives you a very quick snapshot of the Foundation's current assets, and our annual grant making approaches a little over $30 million annually in total. This slide is where I can really begin to focus more on our arts investments. And we've really been looking at the range of programs that we support with the intent to try and have impact within the arts and culture sector at multiple levels. And so this diagram just illustrates where we've been focused on looking at support for artists, where, and I tried to emphasize this point, where artists really are in many aspects at the core of investments that we are making, thus illustrated here in the diagram. In addition, we have programs that are focused on arts and cultural organizations, and then more broadly, we have programs that look at community impact. So you can see these brief bullets describe the nature of the types of programs that where we direct our funding around arts and culture. And one item I think to just call out that we have a couple of key national partnerships as well, including United States artists and ArtPlace that have been an important aspect of our leveraging investments for arts and culture within Alaska. So these next few slides will just briefly highlight we have a program which we call our Individual Artists Awards, and that provides grants for projects and fellowships. And these are images of two artists that have received support recently, both fellowship grants in 2016. The third aspect of that program is what we call our Distinguished Artist Award, which is the selection of a single artist each year who's made significant contributions to the field and to the cultural life in Alaska. This is our recipient, Don Decker, from 2016. This program's been established since 2002, and over that time we've supported a little over 400 artists with these types of grants. This gives just a brief snapshot, and in addition to grants to individual artists, we also have an artist residency program. We started our work around residencies back in 2007 through a partnership with United States artists, and that program ran for 5 years and culminated into this current iteration of a program in which we support 8 artists a year, both from Alaska and from artists from the lower 48 states, and basically with an exchange model of residencies for 2-month residencies, both in Alaska and outside. And this slide shows highlights the partnership between the University of Alaska Fairbanks Native Arts Center and the Santa Fe Art Institute as one of the key partnerships in that program. In addition to the residencies and grants to individuals, we also have a museums acquisitions program which provides funding to museums across the state for building permanent collections of contemporary work. And since inception of that program, more than 1,200 works have been acquired by approximately 25 museums throughout the state, and that's been over the last 14 years or so. So we've had the benefit of seeing visual artists who create contemporary work and a platform for expanding the permanent collections of that work throughout the state. I mentioned our partnership with United States Artists. We've had a total of 12 Alaska-based artists have received United States Artist Fellows since their programs began, and these are our last two recipients from 2015. So just to summarize on our Individual Artist Awards program, as I mentioned, we started that program back in 2002, and having supported more than 400 artists through that time, we conducted a pretty extensive program evaluation of that program back in 2016. And through that process, we identified some key issues that we wanted to consider for the future of the program. And that has included a greater focus on artists' professional development for those that are recipients of awards, to provide some additional resources for them, which is culminated in a partnership with Creative Capital. And then to also really look at better networking opportunities for those artists. Our real purpose of that program from the very beginning was to provide dedicated time and funding for serious artistic exploration, with the idea that that can lead to a more sustained artist practice. And the main criteria for awards in that program is quality of work, promise for future work, and artist growth. I mentioned the three types of awards, and you can see in this slide the funding levels that are made in each of those categories each year. We also look to provide support for artists across career stages, and with the intent of supporting really a full range of disciplines that most artists are practicing. And just to note that our funding is not intended just to directly support scholarly or commercial specific work, and the program is not a needs-based grant, just to make that point. So just a few comments about why artist support is important for Rasmussen Foundation, and what has really urged us to look at that as a significant part of our arts portfolio. I mentioned in my opening that approximately 15 years ago, the foundation began to establish a range of programs and strategic investments, and that was due to a major shift in the foundation's asset base, which the family history was in banking in Alaska, and the family grew what became Alaska's largest bank, and that bank was sold to Wells Fargo back in the year 2000, and the majority of assets from that were directed into the foundation. So that really provided us a way to do a range of work. So in that process of identifying critical needs and issues for investment, we convened a range of stakeholders related to arts and culture, artists and arts leaders throughout the state, and community leaders, to look at how we could be most strategic around our arts investments. And supporting individual artists rose up as one of the top issues identified through all of those different conversations. So that really established a base for the value of that and what would be a key aspect of our programs. Also, recognizing the major shifts in the national landscape of artist support that's been in place certainly since the 1990s, and has continued in some aspects even to the modern day. But considering how those shifts were occurring, that providing support to individual artists became even more urgent as we looked at our particular strategies. Just to note, the Urban Institute's study on investing in creativity in 2003 was really an important base of information and a way to really recognize the key issues around artist support and why that was so important. And that was an important study that's still very relevant even today. Then we also really look at that we believe it's important to create conditions to promote and sustain creative work, and artists have to be at the core of any of that. Simply put, it's not possible for us to have vibrant arts and culture programs without artists and without them really at the core of what we're doing. And we recognize that unrestricted support in its various forms provides the maximum benefit and impact for artists so that they have the flexibility to look at how that support can be directed and how they can benefit at that point in time in their career or the work that they're doing. Also, we see that there are benefits in that when we are able to direct support to artists, that it promotes connections with other artists and with the public in the way that we can elevate the conversation about the value of arts and culture in our communities, and that artists are central to what that is. And to also recognize that support is a form, can be a form of validation for artistic practice, and that can help to leverage other opportunities for artists. And then this slide is just a few key points. I know the title of our webinar is Common Myths about support for artists, and so we wanted to include just a few key bullets of what are often issues that are brought forward in the funding community about why there may be some barriers or issues around directing grants to individuals. And we won't spend too much time on this, but this may be some interest in the Q&A session that we'll have after these initial presentations to address any issues that those that are listening may have. But we recognize that there really are ways, clearly established and good models for providing direct support to artists, that we have that experience at our foundation and many across the country that have done this very successfully. And of course, we know that foundations can make grants to individuals, but there are just some key steps that have to be taken to make that happen. But certainly the mechanisms are there. And then also we've look at the process that we undertake in making grants to individuals, and that there are not concerns around expenditure responsibility if your program is designed appropriately, and does not have to be a hurdle necessarily in the work that you're doing around this. And that the notion of that, sometimes you might hear out there that, well, it can be more financially risky to give grants to individuals. And I can assure you that from even our own experience that we've seen great success in all the grants that we've given to individuals over the past almost 15 years, that we've not encountered issues in this area, and in fact it's not a risky proposition to make grants to individuals. It just requires having good program design and good stewardship. So those are a few highlights just about the myths. And then I'll finally just mention a few key issues about reducing barriers to support and some of the things that we've been learning through our own experience. So we really recognize that it's important to provide resources for an application process for any kind of program that individual artists may be applying to. So it's important to put those in place up front, and to have staff or resources that are accessible to individuals, that whether they're talking directly with program staff or to have a resource that they can lean on to work through that process. We also recognize that it's really important to accommodate different communication styles. While some may be really effective at developing a written plan or a proposal as part of their application process, not everybody has that same comfort level with developing written material, or may have language barriers and other aspects that are really critical to recognize up front and to try to accommodate for a range of ways in which applicants can provide information as part of an application process. And we also recognize that there are different cultural perspectives on what the definition of an artist may be, and this is really important, as we've seen in specific cultural communities, where how an artist defined can vary, and that we work hard to try to recognize that and to accommodate a process that values these different perspectives. We also recognize that while there's some there's a certain structure to our program, as an example, around an application process and information that artists are asked to provide as a part of that. But that, that there's the nature of artistic practice is ever changing in many ways, and so that we have to be cautious to not have so much rigidity in our own program in the way that we define disciplines, for example, or various ways in which artists are providing us information about their work, that we have to recognize the diversity in practice that is always changing. And that, as a part of our process too, we really try to focus on this building a network and community of artists where support is provided. So that was my last slide, and so at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Kristina.
Thanks, Jayson, and hello everyone, and thank you as well to Suchan and Steve and the entire GIA crew. So I work, as you've heard, for the state of Connecticut, which as a practicing artist, if you told me that when I graduated art college that I would work for state government, I would have told you that you're crazy, but here I am. And so in this position, this agency, the Connecticut Office of the Arts, is about 51 years old, and we used to be a standalone commission years ago, but we merged with the Department of Economic and Community Development a little over 5 years ago because the governor wanted to better align arts and culture more directly with economic and community development. So I was brought in 2 years ago to help the commissioner in that effort. I have a background, as I said, as a practicing artist, curator, and arts administrator in nonprofit and public sectors. And I'm the first head of the Arts and Cultural Office for the state with this type of background. So even though, that shouldn't be the case, it often is in government. So I've used my background as a practicing artist very much to influence how we're doing things today. And also being an immigrant and a woman of color, I try to really focus on artist practices and issues that I don't think are commonly thought about in our sector. So the Connecticut Office of the Arts is funded by the state of Connecticut as well as the National Endowment for the Arts. We have around a little under $2.5 million that we invest in arts programming and support every year. And so as part of our partnership with the NEA, we must produce a strategic plan every 5 years. When I came in, we were on the heels of we had to create a brand new plan, and that was completed last September. And we used this as an opportunity to reflect on the why of all the work that we're doing and not the what. And so that I brought in a firm that really helped us by using a human-centered design approach to guide our planning process, which I thought was really important. And for those of you who might not be familiar with human-centered design, that's essentially, it's a design and management framework that develops solutions to problems by involving the human perspective in every step of the way. So we started with our vision and mission, right? When I read our vision and mission statement when I got hired, it just was a lot of words for just no real reason. It's kind of the white noise that you see in a lot of vision and mission statements. And I really challenged our team to think about what we wanted to be and what we're committed to. And so we rewrote our mission and vision statements, and that was a really important thing for us to do, because as part of the strategic planning process, I wanted this office to own our commitments to the field, and we wanted to go on a path of being reflective of what we're hearing from the people that we serve, rather than being in a bubble thinking we know kind of what everyone needs. And so we focused, as part of this, we focused as well on creating our own cultural equity statement, which we came up with this terminology, this framework that we're calling READY, relevance, equity, access, diversity, and inclusion, as part of what we're focusing on. So essentially what we're saying, and you know, these are tiny words. I can give everyone links to where this lives if you're interested later, but essentially we decided that this office will no longer make any investments in the arts unless our artists and organizations are ready. And if they're almost there, but not completely, so they are considering inclusion and access, but they're not quite there with diversity or relevance, we'll help them get ready. And so that was a really interesting way for us to start looking at how we're serving the field through this lens and holding people to different standards. So for us, you know, we really wanted to focus on the infrastructure here. So we wanted to start within. One of the common things that happens in the arts, especially in the public sector, is with leadership change comes programmatic change, and that happens so often. So every time a governor leaves, commissioners leave, staff turnover, and then the programs shift, and then that really impacts our community of artists. And so what I wanted to do, rather than develop a slew of new programs, was to really focus on how we were integrating this practice into the department so that even if I were to leave when the governor changes and the commissioner changes, that the people who we've been working with in the department are so bought in to our approach and to understanding the role of the artists in community and urban development and economic development that they won't allow it. Because I think I've seen when I worked for a city before I took the state job that when I left there, we were doing a million wonderful things, and it was great, but when there was a shift, it disappeared. The entire department was cut. And so that's something that we're trying to be smarter about, especially around changing policy. So we talk about relevance a lot here, and we use the NEA's definition of artistic excellence, but we also know that when we do our grants to artists, we have project grants that artists can apply for. Actually, every one of our competitive grants that we do here in the state of Connecticut through this office has to include at least one Connecticut artist. You cannot receive any grant dollars here from our office if you do not engage an artist in the process, and the artist is not a key component of the project that you're doing. And so outside of using the NEA's definition of artistic excellence, we know also when we look at project proposals from artists that, you know, what we're really looking on is a proposal that reflects an informed understanding of the particular art form that they're implementing, right? It's not just we want to do an illumination project over 50 miles but I've never worked with illumination before. You know, we want to make sure that there is connectivity there and a deep understanding and respect for the discipline. We're also very much committed to looking at opportunities to connect artists to some of the other areas that are priorities within the state. So for instance, we have a reentry program. So we fund arts organizations that are working with men and women in the various prison facilities and using arts as a tool to help them reenter the community. We also are working with organizations that you know, bring artists in to help combat issues of illiteracy or urban blight. And this isn't unique to us. You know, states and cities are doing this across the nation, but we absolutely try to align as part of that infrastructure approach the work that we're doing here with some of the governor's priorities, because that helps reinforce the important role that artists play. In terms of equity, we really, you know, this equity statement, this cultural equity statement that we came up with had never been done. As far as we know, we're the first department in the state of Connecticut to come up with such a statement that sits outside of the standard HR statement that you'd see around diversity. And, you know, I came into a team that it's a predominantly Caucasian team, and I'm, a Black Indian woman, and so when we talk about equity, it's something that, we're all coming to the table with different experiences, and we all wanted to honor that each other in this process, and kind of just, be real about it. So it was very important to us that when we think about these things, that it's something that we get into a practice of through this READY framework, that every time we are doing something, every conversation we're having, every program that we are designing, every single time we think about what equity looks like, accessibility, and diversity not just ethnically, but there's so many different ways to think about that. And so for us, it's, as we say in our statement around equity, policy and practice that is fair and just. Our processes and systems are designed to ensure that we distribute resources without bias. And we are holding ourselves accountable when we look through READY by committing. So in the office, for each of these areas, we've defined what it means to us, and we've committed. So for us, in terms of equity, we commit to a level playing field for constituents to access the resources in our control and the systems we can influence. And diversity. So right now, we're really looking at, Connecticut is a state that is over 80% Caucasian. You'll hear a lot about young people leaving, the state at a pace that we don't, and like seeing with our young creatives as well. They're going to other cities. Many of them are staying, but many of them are leaving, and we're right in between Boston and New York, although those places are becoming more and more unaffordable, which is kind of great for us because I think everyone should move here anyway. So one of the things that we're doing around our grants, we just redesign our entire grants structure. The first thing I heard when I got my job here was that it would be easier to adopt a child than it would be to apply for a grant from our office, and so that shouldn't be the case. And so we redesigned the entire thing to make it much easier for a diverse arts organizations and diverse artists from varying disciplines to apply. To Jayson's earlier point, language and how we communicate with our artists and our constituents are very important because they're all at varying stages of their development, and not all artists are comfortable with grant writing. So we took that into consideration in this redesign process. However, in this slide, we have arts. We focus on arts and learning. We have project grants that will fund anything from public art to special projects in communities. We have this program that's called REGI, which is really focused on community artists in our 9 regions across the state, because our funding reaches all 9 regions. We have our Artist Fellowship Program, and we're about to roll out a new workforce development program focused on college-age students that will place young people that don't see a direct pathway to working in the arts and cultural sector. We're going to pay them. It's going to be essentially a paid internship and apprenticeship program that will offer them exposure to meaningful experiences in arts administration, production, curatorial, etc., not just copying and shredding, and pay them. I think we're at $13 an hour over the summer, so we're going to be rolling that out in a few weeks, where we're kind of becoming a dating service for artists and arts organizations, and we're going to match them where they kind of make sense for each other. So that's a pilot that we're very excited about. We talked a little bit, yeah. So artists and inclusion, for us, this is something that we want to make sure that we are looking when we are holding our roundtables, which we've been doing on behalf of the NEA. The NEA has sponsored us to host these roundtables across the state, and we curate them in a way that we are bringing people to the table that aren't the usual suspects. A lot of times when we tend to talk about these issues, you have a lot of the arts executive directors and kind of the key arts quote-unquote leaders at the table, but you're not hearing from the artists, and we're very sensitive to that, and we want to make sure that that's not the case because you know, I don't have to tell you all that are probably joining in that without the artists, there's no arts organization. So we try to make sure that we're focused on that. Why funding for artists is important. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I think artistic practice and process should be integrated into every aspect of urban and community development. I think it's fundamental. I think artists are natural-born innovators, and working in the Department of Economic and Community Development gives me a direct line to leadership to help them understand this and to help them think a little bit more broadly than kind of the stereotypical ways that they like to think about how artists can be engaged and how their work can be integrated into some of these larger initiatives. I'm happy to tell you more later about what I'm doing there. Here's some questions we often ask ourselves. How is artist support showing up in our work or practice? Looking at our existing practices, policies, networks, or engagement strategies, what could we do to improve artist support within our sphere of influence? And 3, are we doing enough to support artists that are ready, relevant, equitable, access, diverse, and inclusive? And so we ask this every day in every way. And so thank you for giving me an opportunity to share, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristina and Jayson, for sharing about both your programs and kind of your philosophies around artist support. We're going to go ahead and start with Q&A, and just a reminder that you can use your rectangular box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, and in particular, if you have any myths that you would like to either get dispelled or ask more questions about, please be sure to put that in the Q&A question, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So I'm going to start with Jayson, if I could. And you had mentioned in your discussion about artistic excellence that you guys were acknowledging different ways of looking at artistic excellence, in particular because we know that Alaska, the population is different, and you have a lot of folks who are First People and Alaska Native, and there's been discussion around what does artistic excellence look like when you're talking about different cultural communities. Could you talk a little bit more about how the foundation has been tackling that question and how that then plays out in your programming and services?
Thanks, Suzanne. And I think this is really one of the critical issues about any program that's providing access for resources for artists, that in our program, one aspect about considering applications for funding is that we convene a panel of individuals that review applications that are submitted to the foundation. And in our case, because our funding, all aspects of our funding are directed within Alaska, we convene a panel of artists and arts scholars and practitioners and others that, and even within the arts funding community of individuals that are from outside of the state, to look at the applications that are submitted to the foundation. And that panel provides a way of having a pretty broad, diverse perspective about artistic practice generally, and a helpful level of expertise in looking especially at artists who are grounded in culturally based practice. So we think that diversity of experience and perspective helps inform the process as we look at those individual applications. one of the things we also talk with applicants about is that they include information and context about their practice as part of what they would include in their application. They may, if for example they're applying for a project award and they are outlining to do a set of activities over a one-year period, that we encourage them to provide the cultural context for their practice as best as possible within their application and their approach to their project. So that's one specific example of how we're looking at that, and I guess that's what I would say about that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Kristina, I know that you and I had talked a little bit about this too, that in part that you work with the NEA definition, but that the office has also been looking at different art forms to support that may not be the traditional dance, theater, visual arts. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so actually we just sent out a press release just today about our kind of the redesign of our fellowship program. So as part of this, our READY work that we're doing here, we know and we heard from the field that when artists are interested in applying, spoken word artists might not identify as poets, or a hip-hop producer or somebody who's like making music that's outside of kind of a classical genre might not identify as a composer. So we have introduced titles, new kind of pathways for those folks to be able to come in, because we think that this language is really, really important, and that's something that we're pretty excited about. That I think we added 8. I'd have to look at our press release, but we added I think 8 new categories in the fellowship program. And when we were researching it across the nation, we found that pretty much all those fellowships look very similar. They're all very much designed the same way. So we were very excited to see how this might change the types of artists that will be applying for the fellowship. So we'll see. I'll let you know how it goes. We're going to be accepting applications over the next few weeks.
Great. Thank you. Jayson, I'm going to go back to you. We have a question about, it says that you had mentioned earlier about good program design and good stewardship are key to mitigating risk or perceived risk in supporting individual artists directly. Could you please provide specifics around program design? And in particular, I'd love for you to touch upon, because we won't touch upon it at our next session on Artists and Grant Awards, because the foundation does write checks directly to artists. If you could talk a little bit about your program design and then how that works with supporting individual artists through direct checks.
So, Suchan, hopefully I'll get this response right for your question, but as part of a process to actually establish our Artist Awards program, and many may be familiar with this, but to do that it requires developing a program plan that is submitted to the IRS as a way of defining the particular parameters of how funding decisions are determined, who's eligible for that funding, and all of those types of variables. So in that process, we outlined from the beginning to talk about the nature of artistic practice, the types of disciplines that would be part of our program, and the type of information that artists are asked to provide as part of an application process, and then specifics about who is looking at those applications and making the recommendations for funding. So when I talking about the design of the program, there are key elements within that we have looked at to try to provide an appropriate framework for allocating funds to individuals and having a base of accountability for that process, and to ensure that we have a consistent practice within the foundation about how those funds are distributed and also reported on. In our program, we do ask that all grant recipients provide a very brief summary of their experience, or like a final report. The format of that can vary quite widely, but we're just asking for basic documentation that they utilize the funds for the purposes of their artist's work. So those are the basic elements that we've had to put into place to ensure that we are doing that the right way, and in that process too, I don't want to lose sight of the value of having a process that's also fair and equitable, and provides a level playing field for any individual who seeks funding from the foundation and for those who receive our funds. Does that get at your question?
I think so. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll pass this to Kristina, and then maybe Jayson can jump in. We have actually a number of questions about the review panel process. One question is like, how do you assemble a panel that can cover multiple interdisciplinary works beyond the traditional art categories? But then there are some other questions related to the review panel about how do you even do it? How do you work with a panel that works with a really highly competitive process? And is there even such a thing as relying too much on a review panel? So if you could talk a little bit, Kristina, about how you guys approach the review panel process and how that affects the READY framework.
Yeah. So we are very thoughtful about the folks that we bring to the table, and we take a few different approaches. Obviously, the most important are panelists that are we tend to have around four panelists, sometimes 5, but they're all bringing a different lens to the table. So, for instance, we'll have a senior curator from a major museum. We might have an arts administrator from a contemporary multidisciplinary center. We will have maybe a practicing artist and somebody who is a fellow that has been through the program. We might have somebody from education and somebody from kind of economic development and that has some experience within the arts. We also try to involve as a learning opportunity more for them, legislators, right? So folks that need to understand when they're making their decisions about arts funding for states, how we do the work that we do, because there's so many myths about how state art agency funds in general that we tend to try and bring them into the process as well. And we have criteria that we use for every step of the way. The office, when we receive applications, will do a general overview and eliminate those whose applications are incomplete or if there are any conflict issues, and then we will hand it over to our jurors for deliberation, and we guide the conversation and facilitate the conversation to make sure that especially that this will be the first year that we will be asking our panelists to consider our READY framework, that we guide that part of the conversation, but we try to stay out of it so that it's really independent, and at the end they make the recommendations to us, which we then make to our council, but we give them the tools to do so. And so, I'd be happy to share, if it would be helpful, a kind of the behind the scenes process for deliberation. If artists would be interested in seeing it, we'd be happy to share what we use.
Great. Thank you, Kristina. Jayson, do you have anything to add about your review panel process?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, just to say that in many respects, what Kristina just outlined is somewhat similar to the process that we follow. I know I mentioned that in our case, we convene individuals who come from outside of Alaska, and we normally have about 12 panelists who are looking at our applications. We have 10 different disciplines that are defined in the program, and so we go through a pretty extensive process on an annual basis in identifying individuals across the country that have the experience within these individual disciplines, so that group actually is representative of all the disciplines that are a part of our program. And just to provide context, in our program for project and fellowship awards, we receive about 450 applications a year when we make about 35 awards out of that pool. So it's a pretty competitive program for funding, and the panel meets, they get applications in advance of meeting in person in Anchorage over 3 days, in which they will review applications among each discipline, and then on the third day of that meeting they come together as an entire group, and really from a multidisciplinary perspective the entire group of panelists selects the award recipients. So it's a pretty interesting deliberation through that, and also, as Kristina mentioned, that our staff facilitates that process and those panel conversations, but we strictly stay out of, offering an opinion about individual applicants, and really try to keep the independence of the panel to complete their process.
Thank you. We have a question kind of more organizationally. How do you advocate for increasing the number of individual artists that you support when the majority of current support is awarded to organizations? Maybe Jayson, we'll start with you and then pass it on to Kristina.
Well, I'm not sure if this is getting at it, but when we look at our entire arts portfolio, as I mentioned in a graphic a while back, it showed that we've designed our investments around arts and culture to really hit at 3 different levels within the sector. And so we have programs that focus on individuals, we have programs that work with organizations, and then community. And we look at the distribution of funding across those different areas, that actually our support to individual artists on an annual basis is, I want to say it represents about a quarter or a third of our total investments in those arts programs on an annual basis. But again, our artist awards program and our residency program, is 2 of those areas, are distinctively different, and a process for funding that's separate from programs that provide grants to organizations and the community work.
Kristina, do you have anything to
Yes, I would say, well, for us, as I mentioned during my presentation, that you can't apply for any of our competitive funds without including at least one Connecticut artist. So that's one way to advocate. Another way is through our artist directories. We have teaching artist directories. We have a public artist directory. We have various ways that artists can be directly engaged with this office, and we make that public, and we tend to align even outside of our own grant support. We will pair artists up with organizations in the community that we believe would be a good fit for projects, but also talking again and working for a state, helping legislators understand the importance of funding for artists directly, because it is true that the arts organizations tend to get the bulk of the money. And so we're trying to set aside more and more funding in our office that would go directly to support individual artists. So I think that one of the things that we're looking at right now, because we have a lot of operating support programs for organizations. We have two, an endowment, and we have something called Supporting Arts in Place. Those are both operating support programs that organizations can apply for to pay overhead. And I was just saying to the team the other day, I'm like, what about artists operating support? They've got overhead. Why can't we have a specific operating support program for artists that are, functioning as, they're
Right.
small business people as well. And so we're thinking about developing a program for FY, towards the end of FY18 that we could pilot.
Great. Thank you. So here's a myth that somebody is raising, and it's actually on the artist side, and she asks, how do you overcome myths on the artist side that the process is, quote unquote, already against me before I start? So, this is even after the workshops and the criteria modifications and all the other measures that ensure the open and accessible application process. We do know that there are some artists, for pretty good reason have some distrust about the grant making process, and what is it that you guys do to communicate that artists really do have access to these opportunities? And maybe Jayson, we can start with you.
Sure. So we definitely recognize that. I think that there are aspects about funding programs like this that have limitations, and I think the concerns that some artists raise about that process and being, not trusting in all aspects of that is very understandable, and I think there's much history in some respects about how individuals can be disadvantaged or in a process like this and have an equitable opportunity. But one of the elements that we've tried to focus on is to be as accessible as possible through the application process, and we've stepped up our efforts recently to visit multiple communities throughout the state when the application process is available to artists, so that we're trying to be really as accessible as we can, face-to-face, meeting with individuals, often in coordination with a local arts council that convenes those conversations, and really trying to just do that to the greatest extent. And so it's really paramount for us that we are available to confer with anybody who has questions about the process or other factors. So there's accessibility, I think, is a key issue there, and that we're consistent with our practice and our process. I think that's important to help instill trust ultimately. And then finally, one other aspect about our program that we've made a recent change to, and while some of you probably think it's hard to believe that we hadn't been doing this already, but that we've taken some additional steps to share who the individual panelists are that are reviewing our applications each year. And prior to this year, we did not have that step in place. And so we're trying to, increase transparency about who's involved in the process and what that all entails as a way of trying to build those better bridges to for individuals.
Thank you. Kristina?
Yeah, we do. It's similar with us. I said earlier that we fund 9 regional, what we call regional service organizations, and we make sure that they keep us kind of on the ground in their communities across the state, and so we make sure that we're doing a lot of outreach there. We're also much more accessible as an office. We take advantage of our social media, but also we host more webinars. Now it was something that, even though you guys have a nice long history of doing, our office was not doing webinars, and so we found that to be very helpful as well. And so we also have programs where we do these small focus groups that are directly targeting artists to come together so that we're hearing from them and we're giving them the information leading up to when we are posting our applications and sharing them out there. So we're not just sending it to all the usual suspects anymore. We've really worked hard to diversify our database to make sure that information is reaching artists on the front line.
Great. Yeah.
Hey, Sue-Chan, I know we're running out of time, but can I make just
Sure.
one more quick point? And the other thing that we've found that's been really helpful is to also engage other artists who, in many cases, have been past grant recipients in connecting to talk about that process and what they've experienced, and to share, like we've done webinars and other recorded programs to talk about that process and to kind of engage other artists as agents in talking about artist support that many artists, through a survey that we did recently, have asked for. So we see value in doing that.
That's great. Well, I realize that we're right at the top of the hour, so number one, just really want to thank Jayson and Kristina for coming on, sharing about their programs, but I think especially the Q&A, sharing what's happening, the mechanics, and your philosophies have been so helpful. So thank you so much for your time and expertise. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, giving us an hour of your time. We had some questions about assessment and getting feedback from artists. Since we had so many questions coming through, I want to definitely save them for our third session that will be a week from today on getting feedback from artists and using data to improve our programming. And I hope also that you will join us on Thursday for our second session of the series on grant and award distribution models. We'll be hearing from Faction Atlas and Culture Works Philadelphia and the Kresge Foundation on how they work with artists with award distribution and the other services that they provide that supplement those awards to help artists succeed in their goals. It'll be a really great session, so we hope to see you on Thursday. This presentation has been recorded, and we will be sending you a link to the file and to the presentation slides within the next day. We'll also be sending out a feedback survey later on this next week after the entire series is complete. So we hope that you'll let us know how we're doing and give us some ideas for future sessions. If you would like the opportunity to flip through the slides now, we have switched over the slide controls to you, so the slides will be up for about an hour or two. And again, just really want to thank our presenters and you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Thank you so much.